This is another episode of Standup Comedy, your host and MC, celebrating 40-plus years on the fringe of show business. Stories, interviews, and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. Here's your host and MC, Scott Edwards.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the podcast. We have something fun and different for you today. I say that every week, but this really is. Hey, there's a new book out you want to check out. It's by this terrific author, Conan Unegbu, and Carl is here with us today on the show. Now, this guy is a lawyer. He's a journalist. Probably heard of him. He's the editor on Comedy Beat. He has a terrific legal blog called O'Carl's Law. Once again, O'Carl's Law. And back in 2003, he wrote the book Comedy Under Attack, which I think sometimes we all feel like. But he's here to talk about his new book. But let's welcome him to the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Conan O'Brian. Carl, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much for having me.
Well, it's so exciting, being somebody that's interested in stand-up comedy all of my life, to have this book come out that really speaks to some of the issues in the industry. And ladies and gentlemen, it's already available on Amazon. So if you get a chance, it's called Comedy Goes to Court, or When People Stop Laughing and Start Fighting. Man, has that been a problem. We've had such an interesting change in the social balance in the last 20 years that I would think that the law and stand-up comedy have probably crossed paths a few times, right?
Yeah, they do, which uncomfortably, but yeah, they do.
Well, what's interesting is you're a lawyer first, and then a journalist second, and now an author. How did you go from being a lawyer, being interested in stand-up comedy, Carl?
See, when I came up to New York City from Miami, where I was a lawyer at first, graduated from journalism school, and then I started to be a journalist. At first, I was freelancing. Then myself and a few friends of mine, we started a website called Comedy Beat. And I was one of the editors of this website. So began to cover that subject in New York City, of all places. Lots of comedy clubs and comedy people. We started to do that from a journalistic point of view. As I did that, then, I went in there to just talk about comedy as fun and games, but I discovered something entirely different, which is related to why I wrote the book, ultimately.
Yeah, and your first book was in 2003 called Comedy Under Attack. And I have to tell you, as a producer of stand-up comedy shows, this whole social condemnation, culture canceling, ultra-sensitive, thin-skinned audience has really made it challenging to be in stand-up comedy. In 2003, Comedy Under Attack was perfect. But now, several years later, Comedy Goes to Court. And what's great about your book, Carl, is that you discuss some of the bigger cases against and involved with stand-up comedy. But I think it's great timing. Is that kind of why you wrote it?
Yeah, it is. It is. I kind of was also blogging on the side about these issues while we covered comedy. So my daily coverage back then was talking to comedians, finding out what they were doing and all that stuff. And then as I did that, I began to notice something that was not yet on the radar, namely that comedians were getting sued, having to defend lawsuits. You try to talk about a comedian or find out what he or she is doing, and then you hear that this person is involved in some lawsuit. They are being sued. So I started to pay more attention to things like that, in addition to my daily work covering comedy.
Yeah, this has always been kind of a litigious society, but it is interesting that people generally go to stand-up comedy shows to forget about the troubles and problems and kind of laugh at ourselves as a society and as people, and that's what comedy is all about. And people getting thin-skinned and sensitive and then starting to sue about it is just crazy. Carl, I do want to share something with the audience that I think was really something I noticed. The dedication to your new book, and by the way, ladies and gentlemen, it's called Comedy Goes to Court, or When People Stop Laughing and Start Fighting. So be sure to find that on Amazon. But the dedication you put in the book, Carl, was perfect. Here's the dedication. This book is dedicated to the comedy community everywhere and to all who love the comedy art form. And I thought that was really well stated, because stand-up comedy is an art form. It's entertainment. It's meant to be fun, and yet it's finding itself in court.
It's finding itself in court, which is so ironic. But what would you expect, though? I mean, you wouldn't expect, frankly, things to be different if you live in a society like America. And here's the thing. Comedy today isn't like it was back one generation ago, when you had Leno and all those other heavyweights doing the thing. Today, comedy has become more important. It's gotten a higher profile, especially in the pop culture. If you look at political comedy and the stuff they cover, they've become more important. Now they have a larger footprint in stuff. Say maybe you get parodied on Saturday Night Live, or you get satirized, the late night shows, or John Oliver, just you name it. So those things have become important things. So that's number one, the higher profile of comedy today, the mere dominance of the pop culture by comedians, as opposed to, say, other people in the news. Musicians have money and celebrity, but they are not nearly as influential as comedians. So comedians today they've taken on a much higher profile than you had back even just one generation ago. So that's number one. Number two, comedy today has become something where you could make a ton of money and fame. I mean, Louis C.K., I think, in 2011, he told Maxim magazine that the money these promoters are paying him these days is, quote, crazy. He says he could make like $100,000 a night. Well, this was in 2011. Today, in 2023, 24, the situation has gotten even crazier. If you look at the guys doing Netflix specials, guys on Amazon Prime, the streamers and things.
Yeah, dry bar comedy, right?
Yeah, they are making oodles of money. I mean, it's gotten way crazier than it was even in 2011. Let's say maybe Jerry Seinfeld on Netflix, or Chris Rock, or
Jay Leno, right?
Jay Leno, Dave Chapelle, just you name it. Crazier now. There's a lot of money now in the scene. So you have the money, you have the celebrity, and then here's the big one. You now live in a society that is addicted to lawsuits, where people literally sue anything that moves, which is America. So comedy has become the shiny new thing that now attracts the attention of folks, in a litigious society. They could be suing you for money. They could be suing you maybe just because they are offended. For any number of reasons, you could get sued now. Comedy has come into that situation, which means that in today's world, comedians have to understand that defending against lawsuits has become a cost of doing business in the new environment. This is becoming the new normal. And it is not that surprising, given that America is addicted to lawsuits, and comedy has attained a higher profile with money, with celebrity. So, that whole combo kind of explains why we live in this brave new world.
Carl, you said it well, that not only is society more focused on stand-up, it should be looked at as just entertainment, but it's become a voice for social justice and injustice, and I think that makes it a bigger target. But I think the most poignant thing is you said where there's the money, there's the lawsuit. So as comedy,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, some people sue for the money, some sue for the fame, but it's all about the bigger target that stand-up comedy has come. And ladies and gentlemen, when you go pick up the book, Comedy Goes to Court, you're going to find that Carl wrote it in a great way. It's a real easy read. There's not a lot of, lawyer talk or spewing of law jargon. It's real good examples. You use actual cases to explain your position on stand-up comedy and the law when it comes to these lawsuits. And what was interesting, I was shocked and surprised to hear names like Jay Leno and Conan O'Brian and Jimmy Kimmel, who are usually kind of considered the nice guys, I wasn't as surprised to hear that, Howard Stern or Charlie Sheen ended up in lawsuits. But what's interesting is that your book, in a very easy way, uses these cases to explain the law and stand-up comedy. I found it really well written. Good job, Carl.
I appreciate that. Now, you see, when we talk about why people get sued, there are different motivations now for comedians getting sued. Apart from those maybe suing to shut you up, there are those who file what you can say are strategic lawsuits. Like, for instance, billionaires who sue you knowing they probably won't win, but they want to drag you through the coals, make you spend money, make you sweat it. You had a guy like Robert Murray, the guy who owns the biggest coal company in America, Murray Energy. So he sued John Oliver a few years ago, 2017, for defamation and things like that, because Oliver said that he was undermining safety regulations in the coal mines. This was after some explosion happened in some coal mine in Idaho, where 9 miners got killed. So the report came out by some official agency that, the explosion was because of, neglect of safety regulations at the mine. But the billionaire owner was saying, it was just an earthquake that caused the explosion. So there was that controversy. But anyways, Oliver took a shot at the guy, at the Trump supporter and things like that, after the guy testified before Congress. So he told Oliver, look, I'm sending you a letter, says I'm deceased. Don't do this show. Oliver refused and did the show anyway, and he sued Oliver. Well, eventually he lost. But guess what? Even though everybody knew he was going to lose, and he lost early and easily. But by the time he lost, Oliver had spent over $200,000 in legal fees. And then his insurance went up like 300%. But that was the point, to shut the guy off. It was a strategic lawsuit.
Yeah,
something Donald Trump did to Bill Maher.
Yeah, people are using lawsuits to penalize other people.
Yeah, exactly, to get them to shut up. So they knew they were not going to win, but it's like, yeah. So it's part of the things comedy faces today, because comedians talk for a living, they offend people. But anyway, the Donald Trump case against Bill Maher was the same thing. Bill Maher went on Jay Leno's show. He told Leno that Donald Trump was the son of an orange orangutan, that Donald Trump's hair color and the color of an orange orangutan were the only two things in nature of the same color. That if Donald Trump could show evidence that he was actually a human being that wasn't part orange orangutan and a human woman, that he would give him $5 million. Well, everybody laughed and thought it was a joke. Well, the following week, Donald Trump, lo and behold, produced his birth certificate.
Oh, funny.
Produced his birth certificate and then told Bill Maher, hey, pay up $5 million.
Wow.
Well, yeah,
it's interesting. One of the things we should tell the audience, Carl, that some of the topics that you talk about in the book, for example, I have a few here. Stand-up as free speech, what are the limits? And I thought that was fascinating. Comedy material versus people's lives, which is what you were just talking about. And then the money of comedy, and one of the examples was Gary Shandling versus Brad Gray and the millions of dollars involved. And what's interesting, Carl, is that I'm an older guy and I was producing shows in the 80s and 90s. I worked with Gary and Brad, and I worked with Jay Leno and Jerry Seinfeld, and all these guys and I had a relationship and worked together back in the day. So to hear about these lawsuits and the stories was fascinating. Now, I've name-dropped a few comics' names in talking about your book, but who might be, is there other celebrities that the audience might be surprised to find have been sued or in your book?
Oh, yeah, a whole bunch. Actually, one of the reviewers of the book, it's funny what he said. He said, that anybody who wasn't mentioned in the book maybe wasn't important in comedy. I wouldn't go that far, but any person you could think of is in the book. Gary Shandling, Brad Gray, Dave Chapelle versus Comedy Central, Conan O'Brian versus NBC Universal, Howard Stern versus Sirius XM, Adam Carolla versus Donny Mizrahi, John Lovis and his business partner Frank Kelly, the Edinburgh Fringe, Jerry Seinfeld, Jimmy Kimmel.
You've got a bunch of people that I think everybody has heard of, and coincidentally I had worked with. It's really interesting. But one of the things I got out of your book was that this is focused on comedians in the comedy industry, the stand-up industry, that I love. And yet I think that even if people are not in comedy, I think you can learn something from this book. Don't you agree?
Absolutely.
Like contract law.
Contract law. And then, even just the way we live in society today, all the controversy in our polarized society and cancel culture and stuff. So comedians are free speech advocates. As they say, look, I hate to quote Elon Musk, but Elon Musk said, for instance, that if you believe in free speech, you have to be willing to protect free speech even when somebody is saying something you don't like. So if comedians are folks who say the most outrageous things that people feel most offended about, okay. So if we can protect their free speech, it means that we can protect the free speech of all the rest of us. So in that sense, comedians stand as our proxies in the free speech fights over, what can be said and what cannot be said under the First Amendment. So we all have a dog in this fight, even though we are not, those of us who may not be professional comedians. If comedians lose, then the rest of us lose our protection for free speech under the First Amendment.
Well, Carl, I think you said it well there, is that the stand-up comedy being what I say is the last bastion of free speech is also the tip of the spear at making sure that in this country where freedom of speech is so important, stand-up comics are the brave souls pushing that envelope all the time, and that benefits all of us because it lays the groundwork for our basis of free speech. Now, one of the other topics that I think would be interesting to my audience, Carl, is that as a producer, I never allowed other comics to borrow, quote unquote, or steal material from another comic. And because I worked with people like Seinfeld and Leno and Shandling, to name a few, Bob Saget, there were always careful to make sure people weren't stealing material. Can you, in a short way, kind of quote your book? Where's the line drawn between a similar concept and actual stolen material?
Yeah, that's you're coming into the area of copyright infringement, joke stealing, which I cover in the third chapter of the book. I had a case here that demonstrated some of those controversies, like the case of Conan O'Brian, when somebody sued him for some guy who pushes his jokes on Twitter, X, formerly Twitter, as they say now. That was about something from the Washington Monument, about how the Washington Monument was shrinking. So this guy said the thing he claimed he said the thing on Twitter, and then later that same evening, Conan O'Brian said the thing on his show. Well, guess what? Conan O'Brian had more national profile. He had a larger microphone than this guy who was just on Twitter. So the accusation was that Conan O'Brian copied from him.
And that was the difference. I'll give you a great example, Carl. I got a chance to work with Robin Williams, and Robin Williams was a sponge that absorbed material and ideas from other people and things he heard. And then when he was going machine gun style on stage and throwing out 1,000 jokes in a minute, sometimes he was known to use other people's material. Now, Robin was always very upfront. He always apologized and usually paid off the comic that he may have accidentally borrowed material from. But what you're saying is that you can't just claim that you said something first. You have to, like you said, have the bigger microphone and be able to prove it. But I was just curious, for a lot of my audience are working comics, if there's any advice you'd give them to make sure they don't cross that line.
Yes, absolutely. Incidentally, comedy protection, the jokes in comedy are not as well protected as, say, the copyright in, say, music or in movies. Those ones they enjoy effective protection. Comedy's protection is kind of weak. I mean, if somebody is a joke stealer, the only way that's effective against a joke stealer is to maybe blackball him or something. But in terms of the law, it's sort of more difficult to do that. But if you want to avoid the level of a joke thief, then you have to at least say the same thing. There is no protection for an idea. If you say an idea of Christmas, or maybe an idea of, say, what somebody does at a baseball game, what is protected is the way you put those ideas. You understand? The way you use the ideas. You cannot, for instance, nobody has a copyright protection from saying something like Happy Christmas or Merry Christmas. No. It's such a common thing that you couldn't copyright that. But you could use a joke about Christmas that is different from the way the other person used it. So while you can both use Christmas, but you can say them differently. So what is protected is expression, not the idea. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, and I think it's important that people understand that the concepts, the ideas in comedy, you want them relatable, which means that everybody's using them. But what makes you unique as a comic is your approach to that topic, your approach to that joke. So using Christmas like you did, you could have 6 Christmas jokes, but even if they're all about Christmas trees or Christmas presents where it's getting more specific, still 6 different people can have a different way to make that funny. And I also wanted to add in there, Carl, if you don't mind me jumping in, is Please. That it's important that you point out that the law is weak when it comes to supporting copyright laws in stand-up comedy. However, it is peer pressure. It's the pressure of the producers and the other comics to make sure that those stealing material don't succeed in doing that. It's peer pressure that will stop them, right?
Right. I mean, that's a more effective tool. But in terms of the law, it's not very easy because, all they have to do is kind of say it a bit differently and they are protected. They may see ideas come very close, but, once they are able to use different words to say the same thing, then they are in the clear. But in terms of proving the thing, you also have to show that the person had access to the material. If the guy who sued Conan O'Brian, to prove access to the material is very easy because, it's on Twitter. Everybody has access to Twitter. He could say, well, he saw it on Twitter. But if you cannot show that the person had access to it, then they could say, well, you two have similar ideas, because comedians kind of look at things, broadly similarly from the rest of us. So they can say, well, if you can show that he had access to the platform or the place where the material was, affixed, that then, to prove your case may not be that easy. I think the best protection you can have is really to express your idea in a different way from the other person. So once you can do that,
right? Be unique, be creative,
be unique.
Yourself.
Exactly, be unique. Unique expression. Again, like I said, if your listeners if there's one thing they can take away from this conversation about joke stealing, it's this: what is protected is not the idea, but the expression of the idea, the unique expression of the idea, the way you say the idea, different from the way the other guy said the thing. So, with respect to jokes, you can make jokes about any number of ideas, but as long as your spin on the thing is kind of different, you're fine. But, in the comedy industry, comedians kind of know who maybe has stolen a joke from the other or not. So effectively, the best way to do the thing, is the gatekeepers, the producers, who have to actually keep out, the joke stealers and the bad actors in the community.
Right.
If you were dealing with musicians, actors, their protection when it comes to copyright is like effective compared to what happens in comedy.
Well, it's so funny. We're talking about this. I'm going to throw you a curveball, Carl.
All right,
So,
let's see.
what is unique about stand-up comedy industry, let's say, versus the music industry? So we've heard a lot of times of people, quote unquote, borrowing or stealing the guitar licks or lyrics from a song, and they get sued and there's copyright because the song is right there. It's written down. It's permanent. But when it comes to stand-up comedy, what makes that unique for you as a lawyer?
Yeah, what makes comedy unique from music, essentially, again, it's the kind of protection they offer. And then one other thing, in terms of creativity, you see, comedians work alone, for instance. Unlike musicians and actors, many of these people, they work in groups and they take a while to produce, the product, right? To produce the movie, the gestation period.
And good stand-up. Yeah, and good stand-up comedies off the shoulder, quick stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, they just go and go and go, and they don't have lawyers hanging around trying to scrub the thing.
Let's hope not.
To protect them. Yeah, to protect them from defamation lawsuits or invasion of privacy claims or infliction of emotional distress claims. So they don't have lawyers trying to do that with comedians, because comedians, their instinct is to go where the joke is, where the funny is. So for that reason, they just blot it out. So, they tend to get in trouble quicker with things like that than musicians and actors. Because, before a movie comes out, there are batteries of lawyers, working on these things, making sure that all the licenses have been received, all the copyrights and everything, all the defamation problems from the product have been scrubbed away, invasion of privacy, all those kinds of things. So those troubleshooting activities that lawyers perform with actors and musicians, you don't have that in comedy because, one, comedians work alone. Their work is more instantaneous, more instinctive. They go where the jokes are. So, you have that difference there. Aside from the narrow protection that the law gives to, comedy products, as opposed to products in music and
right. I appreciate you explaining that, Carl, because it is interesting that music and acting and movies and TV, you have not only lawyers watching over and protecting you, but it's a group effort that takes time. Where stand-up comedy, it's a solo venture. It's
exactly
immediate. It's in the moment. Really good comedy is in that moment with the audience. And even if the comic tells the same joke 5 times in a week, because there's 5 different audiences, it's going to come out 5 different ways. Hey, I'm going to throw one more thing at you, Carl, before we let you go. Now, you're a lawyer and you like stand-up comedy. So what part of these two industries, or what part of your book is your favorite, do you think is the most important?
Yeah, look, if somebody, first of all, I'd like everyone to read the whole book. But if somebody doesn't want to read the whole book, but they want to read just one chapter, for instance, I would say read the chapter on free speech. It touches everybody, comedians, as well as people who are not comedians. And, it's the biggest chapter in the book. And it has demonstrative cases from literally every big name in comedy that you can think of. Not only people in this country, I have cases here involving some famous comedians from other countries, Britain, Australia, Canada, even Germany and Turkey. So, most of it is based on American comics, but, I have coverage of other free societies out there in the world, Canada, the UK, Australia. Yeah, so that chapter is very instructive, very informative, because it kind of shows you the contours of what you can say and what you cannot say in terms of comedy and not lose your shirt. Again, one of the big things I say in that chapter is that because of the First Amendment, America is by far the best country somebody could practice comedy without losing their shirt, because, it's a free speech environment. Sort of, you don't have that kind of free speech, even in Canada, for instance. If you make a joke, one guy made a joke, one of the cases I covered in the book, somebody made a joke about a disabled kid. And he was held liable by the Human Rights Commission in Canada. And he paid thousands of dollars. I mean, that could never happen in this country, thanks to the First Amendment. I mean, in this country, perhaps you could get canceled, but you are not going to be penalized by any official authorities over what you've said because, under the First Amendment.
Well, I agree with you, Carl. God bless America. Freedom of speech.
Exactly. God bless America.
Quick side
God
story.
God bless America for the First Amendment. Yeah,
exactly. And Carl, I just want to throw this out for the entertainment of my audience and for you. I worked a lot with Yakov Smirnoff, who is a Russian comic. He used to work on ships in the Black Sea, and he started off in Russia. And there's actually a Department of Jokes in the government of Russia, the Department of Jokes, and comics have to run all the material through them. And when they get on stage, they can't be free form. They can't be creative. No. They have to say the line as they wrote it and got it cleared by the Department of Jokes. And if not, they got shot.
Yeah, dude. Yeah, it's in China. In China, as of now, what time is it right now? It is still like that in China today. I mean, if you say things that are not approved by the official censors, then they'll string you up.
Yeah, you better be a really quick comic if you're in China or Russia. But be a comic in America, use the freedom of speech, and if you're smart, you're going to get the book, Comedy Goes to Court, When People Stop Laughing and Start Fighting. It's available on Amazon. Carl Unegbu is the author. So happy to have you on the show, Carl. Folks, it's only $16.99. What a bargain. $16.99 on Amazon. If you get a chance, get this book, read it. No need to talk to a lawyer. You got Carl in your side, and he'll explain this stuff and has great, easy to understand examples using cases from people that we've all known and heard of, Seinfeld, Leno, you name it, Conan O'Brian. And I found it really educational, knowledgeable, and for $16.99, a great bargain. He also has his blog, O'Carl's Law. If you want to look for that, you can get some great information there. Carl, so nice to have you on the show.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me, and I'm so honored to have spent some time with you. And I hope that your audience members would go out and get the book. As they say, this book is a should read for all the rest of us and a must read for comedians.
Yeah, and I think that that's the important takeaway. I wanted you on my podcast because I love stand-up comedy as much as you do, and this book helps those in the industry understand the legal aspects of it. And I, for one, and I think my audience, did you like this? Good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, go out and get the book, $16.99 on Amazon. It's called Comedy Goes to Court. Carl Unegbu is the author. Carl, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate you being here.
Thank you very much, Scott. And they can also get the book from bookstores. All they have to do is ask, and the book can be made available to them.
That's perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening today. Hopefully you learned something. We'll be back next week with some more stand-up comedy and information that might benefit your life and career. Thanks for listening. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC. For information on the show, merchandise, and our sponsors, or to send comments to Scott, visit our website at www.standupyourhostandmc.com. Look for more episodes soon and enjoy the world of stand-up comedy. Visit a comedy showroom near you.